November 2022 education webinar, this month brought to you by Dr. Jonathan Prosser, consultant psychiatrist, and this is on outcome oriented or solution focused outcomes for GP consultations. It was a great talk. We got some fantastic feedback at the end. There's some really revolutionary ideas here. It's a very, very different approach to certainly what I'm used to, and I think many of those of the locums who were listening in on the talk also experience as well. So really worth the watch. We've got a fantastic download that goes with this. Jonathan's produced some really good questions and answers and ideas for you to do this sort of thing in your own surgery. We've got a good quick Q&A session at the end as well. So I'll leave the rest over to Jonathan. So welcome, Jonathan Prosser. Please introduce yourself, and the floor, as it were, is yours.
Okay, so thank you. I'll introduce myself in a second. You've said that your particular group enjoyed it. Other GPs have found it useful in the past, and I worked for a while, about 12 years ago, with a GP to try and come up with a 10-minute package or a 6-minute package of things you can do. But this is all about extra tools you can have other than trying to help patients with their problems when they come to see you. Nice if that moved on. So, and I've called it outcome orientation for today, but you may have heard of solution focused therapy that harnesses these techniques. Motivational interviewing harnesses these techniques. The youngsters of today are talking about manifesting. That's actually similar to what we're doing. It's imagining what you want in concrete detail, and it comes true a surprising amount of the time. And many colleagues, GPs and others, have said, but this is just common sense. I've been doing this for years. And of course you have. If you're intuitive and continually curious, you'll move away from what we were trained to do at medical school and come up with new and innovative ways of making your customers satisfied and leave your surgery in a happier state. So what qualifies me to speak to you? So I have been a child psychiatrist for the vast majority of my career, sliding into management in the latter years, finally making it briefly to chief medical officer, early retirement, and back as a chief clinical information officer trying to fix NHS digital stuff, which is where I think the biggest changes are needed. However, this call has come from the past to say, can you resurrect your thinking about solution-focused thinking? And I still use it to this day in terms of imagining where we want to get to, rather than thinking about the problems we have to solve and how do we move forward. So you'll understand more about that as we go on. It's going to be a pretty tall order to get through this in 45 minutes and include questions, but I aim to allow questions because certainly questions routinely come up. So if you can imagine a scale where at 10 out of 10, a patient comes in, tells you something, and you know exactly what to do. It's quite obvious. And the other end of the scale is a patient comes in, starts talking, and you're thinking, what the hell? What the hell do they expect me to do? Why, what's going on here? The approaches I'm talking about today work at the bottom end of this scale. So if you've got somebody who comes in with central crushing chest pain, radiating down their left arm, I suggest you don't do solution-focused therapy. I think you get on with what you need to do. The patient is handing over complete control to you, and you can crack on and do what's necessary. But in the middle and towards the lower stages, where you're less and less sure that you've got an answer for them, this is where these tools are potentially helpful to you. So I'm going to briefly cover 4 lines of alternative inquiry. The first is not so much an inquiry, but it's a recognition that they're telling you a story, and the story they're telling is not the same as the truth. There isn't a thing called the truth. We humans just operate on stories, and I'll say more about that in a second. Then we'll cover a line of thinking. What are you expecting of me? What's the contract between us going to be? The key takeaway message is a line of questioning that helps elicit what your patients want, not what they don't want. Problems are statements of what people don't want, and that's not the same as what people want. There's a fundamentally different set of answers you get if you go down the line of asking people what they want instead of assuming that they don't want the problem that they're telling you about. And finally, and this will be sketched over extremely briefly, some techniques for teasing out from their lives, from their experience, from their past, awareness, skills, knowledge, abilities, exceptions that they're going to be able to use to help them get what they want. In other words, getting what they want is not going to come from you, it's going to come from them. So what do I mean by stories? Well, anyone familiar with Buddhist ideology will understand this straight away. This is the idea that reality isn't something humans are capable of understanding. It's too complex. It's too multifaceted. So we create stories to explain our experiences, our perceptions, our life, our relationships. We don't have any stories when we're born. You can make a baby suffer by causing it pain, but as soon as you stop causing it pain, the baby stops suffering. It doesn't have the ability to tell a story such as I am being abused. And in that respect, it's like many, many animals. But we grow up and we start telling stories. This young man is saying, I'm a punk rocker, I'm a rebel, I'm a glue sniffer, I wear clothes to show what I am. He's already started to tell stories about himself. But one of the reasons I ended up in child and adolescent psychiatry as opposed to adult mental health is those stories are still pretty fluid. And it doesn't require enormous skill to hack into stories and start to select alternative stories. But the older and older you get, the more and more difficult it gets. And trying to talk this lady out of her Brexit point of view is probably a waste of breath. The point about this being you have to handle people differently depending on how set in stone their stories are. Oh, and I just dropped this picture in as a sort of curio, really. This is a computer amalgamation of about 50,000 human faces from all ethnicities, all ages. This is the average human face. And how that relates to stories, I think, is when you look at that, this is a storyless face. This is a face of complete tranquility and calm because there's nothing going on in their head that's causing suffering. To labor the point a bit, you could see the universe that we live in, the world that we live in, as a near infinite amount of points of actual fact, factual accuracy. But humans can't get by just trying to attend to everything that's true at every single moment in time. In order to simplify things and get through our lives, we start to connect the dots and instead tell the stories. So in this example, we've got 2 points. On Tuesday, I woke up and I felt sad. And on Wednesday, I woke up and I felt sad. Being human, I start to connect those two things to a story, which is I'm sad. And then I start looking for evidence, other evidence that I'm sad. Well, I remember I used to be happy and I'm not like that anymore. And I remember that I used to go out more than I go out now, etc., etc. And we start to extend stories and look for evidence that increases those stories. And the curious fact about human psychology is the more you tell those stories to yourself, the more set and ingrained they are. The conventional approach taught in medical schools and now enshrined in cognitive behavioral therapy is to question the validity of the link between those two things. So just because you woke up feeling sad yesterday, the day before that, does that actually mean you are depressed? Is that true, or might this be 3 days of sadness that don't equal depression? You start to question the links between points in the story, and you gradually break down the problem story. I always found that hard work and not very rewarding. The reason why the talk title has got recharging your batteries in it is that what tends to drain my batteries is being in problem land. And wherever I can, I get into solution land or outcome land. What do I mean by that? Well, at the same time as this negative story is going on, there's thousands of other points of truth that haven't been connected yet. I'll use an ancient example. Sorry, I'm pulling it the wrong way. I'll use an ancient example from practice when I was back in Newcastle of a kid who had come in, forced to come in. He'd been stealing cars, taking money from his parents, stealing cars, not going to school. So his blue story was big and his mum emphasized it and he accepted it was all true. And this was a big old problem. And I asked him, I said, when you're not stealing cars and bunking off school and taking drugs and taking money from your parents, what else do you do? What else do you do that makes you you? He said, well, I'm good at making cheese scones. And his mum agreed that he was good at making cheese scones. And it turned out that his whole family would ask him to make cheese scones before he visited them. And so it was a line of inquiry I could follow about, tell me more about this. Do you plan to be a baker when you're older? He said, I think that'd be quite a nice idea. And I was able to explore that story and connect new dots. What else is true about you, as well as being a good baker? He said, well, I think I'm a pretty good uncle, actually. I've got a small nephew and he looks up to me. He doesn't know I do any of this other stuff, but I wouldn't want him to know because I don't want him to turn out like me. All these are points of fact that are true about this young man, simultaneously to all the bad behaviors. We have a choice as practitioners to focus on the problem or focus on things other than the problem. And I have just found in my practice that by rehearsing that positive story, it becomes the dominant discourse about that person, as opposed to the negative story being the dominant discourse. To labour the point even more, another way of thinking about it is a sense of well-being in our lives is a sense that our health, the good things about being alive are outweighing the bad things about being alive. And we have a choice to focus on the bad things and try and make them less, or focus on the good things and try and make them more. It sounds incredibly simplistic, but all I can tell you is that I practiced this for 30 years and it got me through. So the challenge is when a family like this walks into your surgery, your brain will likely start to tell a variety of stories. Oh my God, what's the knife for? This is a single mum. These children are out of control. They've come for some spurious letter to get some benefits. Your heart is sinking because of the stories this image invites you to tell to yourself. And the challenge is to have an open mind and to not know anything about them until you start asking them questions and they start talking about themselves and describing their identities. So using that family as an example, it's then important to, so the what's their story bit is sort of done inside your head. How, to what extent are they telling a story about themselves or somebody else that's a problem? The more addicted to the story they are, the slower you'll have to go and the more gentle you'll have to be in ever so subtly waking them up to alternative stories that could be told about this situation or the future. However, that's not usually what the expectation of the patient is. The patient is conditioned to expect us to be the experts in their healthcare, while they're dumb punters who don't know anything. So, doctor, my flat's damp. Doctor, I think I want some antibiotics for my daughter. Doctor, my contraception has clearly failed 5 times. They're wanting you to do something and they're treating you as an expert. And there's an assumption that the contract between you is you're the expert and they're looking to you for the answers. And on the face of it, they'll take the answers, but we all know that at the end of the scale we're looking at, they're often not interested in some of the answers we have as experts. So what's the alternative to that? It's you have to start with the open mind, as if you're a Martian, you've come to Earth and you've met this family and you have no idea whether this is a normal family or not. You have an open mind. They're standing there, you can smell what they smell like, you can look at what they look like, you can hear what they sound like, but you don't know what any of it means. And this makes you rather like a sort of anthropologist, interested in how this family works, and you're going to ask them questions about themselves. They're the experts in their lives. They're the experts in what they want. They're the experts in how much energy or motivation they've got to get what they want. It's their business. It's their responsibility. You're like Columbo. Sorry for our younger listeners who've never seen Columbo, but he's a detective that never says anything. He just asks questions, and by asking questions, the truth tumbles out. And he's continually perplexed, and I don't quite understand what you mean. You know, doctor, I'm depressed. I don't really know. Can you explain what that means? I don't know what depression means. Although in a solution-focused world, he'd say, and how will you know when you're not depressed? A very sort of curious, not knowing, quite humble position to ask Socratic questions to get the answers that you want. And so the partnership between you is, well, I'm an expert in human medicine, but you're an expert in yourself. So let's partner up and see if I've got anything that could be of help to you in pursuing your life. I'm not going to fix your life, but I may be able to help you fix your life. So that's the expectation part, the contract between you. Do not fall for the assumed contract that because they tell you a problem, you have an obligation to do something about it. I would take a patient's expression of their problem as a sort of initial test of relationship and trust. Listen to them with interest until I can get on to the most important part of the consultation, which is, what do you want? So they may have sat there and said, well, you know, I've been left by my husband and I've got no money, and I've got damp in the flat and it's really affecting the children, and it's affecting my mental health. I think my depression's coming back. That's the negative story. And I'm listening to it not to dismiss it, but to wait for an opportunity that won't annoy them and won't lose my patients, won't make them storm out of the room, waiting for an opportunity to then say, so what do you want today? How were you hoping I could help today? And there's a simple algorithm to follow on what people want, based on the following map. So this is a sort of map of information, places you can go to ask questions. Clearly, the problem is staring you in the face, and your medical training and the assumed relationship you have with the patient is almost inviting you with the gravity of a black hole to start asking questions about the problem. Well, so you say depression, how long have you been feeling depressed? Or you say damp, what's the story of the dampness? Or you say your partner's left, was that because there was some difficulty, was the domestic violence? You know, you're going into the problem land and in a sense exploring that blue line story and making it stronger by asking more questions about it. Asking questions about what you want enables you to ask questions about the future when the problem is gone, or the present, which is when there are times that the problem is not affecting you, or the past without the problem. All of these are fertile areas you can explore conversationally for information to help add to, let's call it a red story, an alternative story. So we are trained, or historically, to ask, to take a history. What is the past situation that you've been in? What brings you here? And it will be answered in problem terms. And the expectation is, in future, my treatment will give you a strategy to get better. This solution-focused approach, or outcome-orientated approach, turns that on its head and asks, what goal are you after? How will you know that this problem is gone? What will it look like? What in detail, what will it seem like? And what information from your past and present feels useful to construct ideas or thoughts that will help you achieve your goal? For example, oh, doctor, I'm very depressed. Okay, if you've got a good relationship with your patient, if you don't mind me asking, which of the last 7 days, so you've been depressed for a long time, but let's just focus on the last 7 days. On which of those days were you least depressed? Well, maybe last Wednesday when I went to visit my niece. Okay, describe to me what you were like when you were with your niece. Well, I just had a bit more energy, and I had a bit more life, and I had a bit more sense of hope and joy. I'd be saying, it's so interesting, isn't it, that your body is capable of that sense of life and joy, even though it was a small part of the week and it only happened because you were with your niece. How interesting. I think that tells us. So maybe you should keep your eye on those variations and look for clues as to what is unique about those times when that depression isn't bothering you, not knocking on your door. The gold standard solution-focused therapy question is the miracle question. In my work with my GP colleague and GP seminars and things we did in the past, we figured there probably wasn't time to do a miracle question or ask a miracle question, but it's worth presenting, and I'll tell you why. And it's almost a scripted question. Suppose you left here and tonight, while you were asleep, a miracle happened, so that everything that led to your coming here was solved, just like that. But because you were asleep, you would have no way of knowing that that miracle had happened. How would you find out? What would be different tomorrow morning that would begin to tell you that miracle had taken place? And it all starts off with a long silence. And they might say, well, I wouldn't feel so depressed anymore. I'll come back to that in a second. So frequently they'll say what a miracle wouldn't be like. And you flip that on its head and say, so instead of feeling depressed, you'd be feeling what? Well, happy. Now, happy is a woolly goal. It's hard to identify when you are happy. So I'd be saying, and how do you know when you're happy? What are the signs of it? I have a smile on my face and I'm nice to my children. Nice to my children is too woolly. I say, so when you say nice to your children, what would your children notice about you? Well, I'd be kind, another woolly one. What kind of kind things would you do? Well, I'd say, would you like me to make you an omelette this morning? Okay, what else? What else would be sign of you being in a different state? And I would shamelessly use my time to explore that rather than explore the problem, because my experience is exploring what good looks like starts to bring it true. It builds appetite in a person to have that and to do the things necessary to get there. Very frequently, they will say, well, my son will stop being so naughty, or my son wouldn't have ADHD anymore. So this is a goal for somebody else. I might pause on that image of my son won't have ADHD to turn the negative goal into a positive goal. How would your son be behaving if he didn't have ADHD? What are you looking for in your son? Well, I'm looking for him to sit for more than 2 minutes while I tell him something and finish his meals and not be sent home from school every day. And what will he be like to achieve that? Well, a bit more calm and a bit more settled and listen more. And when is he like that a little bit? Well, when he's fishing, he's much calmer when he's fishing. I wonder how he does that. And then turning the goal for little Johnny into a goal for yourself. Say, suppose your son changed to be like that. What difference would it make for you as a mum and you as a person? Well, I wouldn't be shouting at him all the time. Okay, that's a negative goal. How would you be all the time with your son? So can you see there's an algorithm here that negative leads to automatically leads to flipping it to a positive question. A woolly goal requires them to give concrete, observable answers to it. Goals for other people can be flipped to ask for, and what difference would that make for you? And then finally, there is a very common thing of a sort of mythical goal that would solve everything. If I got my housing benefit, I'd be better. Suppose you had your housing benefit, what difference would it make? Well, I'd be able to give my kids more of what they want. Can you just describe exactly what difference that kind of money would make, or if you got that benefit? You start to look for the goal that's above the assumed route to a goal. I once had a drug addicted client who said, oh, I'd have a big pot of cocaine, A-grade cocaine, by my bed. What difference would that make, I asked? He said, well, if I had that, I wouldn't have to spend all day wondering where I was going to get my cocaine for the day. Okay, what do you suppose you'd do instead? He said, I think I'd probably go to school. I said, why would you go to school? What's the benefit for you in going to school? Well, I can't spend all my life as a scumbag. I would like to get an education. Suppose you got an education, what difference would that make? Well, my father would be proud of me. Is your father being proud of you something that you're very interested in? He said, it is actually, because he thinks I'm a scumbag, and I probably am a scumbag. So, and what kind of things would convince your father that you were somebody to be proud of? He said, well, if I gave up drugs. And I said, but you love drugs. So is giving up drugs a price you would be prepared to pay in order to get your father's pride? He said, I think it probably is. So that sequence of questioning, where I didn't say, no, you can't have cocaine, that's bad, you're a drug addict, you mustn't take cocaine. The sequence of questioning left cocaine behind ages ago and got into fruitful territory of real motivations in life. Now, he probably carried on taking cocaine, don't get me wrong, but I contend that he is more likely to change now than he was before that conversation, because he's got some new ideas in his head. They're his ideas. I didn't give him those ideas, but pulling out his motivators. So going back to what's the alternative to the miracle question, more simply in a 6-minute consultation or a 10-minute consultation, what do you want today? My GP friend Jenny said, what do you want today? That was her starting question, as opposed to questions like, what seems to be the trouble? Or what brings you today is ambiguous and usually will be responded to with a statement of a problem of some kind. If you can hijack that by saying, what do you want today? As firmly as you dare. Well, I'd like a prescription for antibiotics because I've got a cold. Well, okay, and I'm not going to give you that because antibiotics aren't the treatment for a cold. Is there anything else you want today? How are you hoping things will turn out? How will you know things are better? When all this is in the past, what will be different? When this problem has been solved, how will you be different, do you think? All just variations on a theme, including the contracting question of how were you hoping I could help with that? So the final bit then is exploring things that are already here. Now here you are looking for small mercies. They are usually in a state that it feels pretty hopeless, a state of learned hopelessness or learned helplessness. And they can give you infinite number of examples of why the problem is a problem. But you're looking for opportunities to find out, when is the problem not a problem? When has there been an exception to this problem? If, like, when my cocaine taker, have you taken cocaine all your life? God, no, I only started when I was 12. How did you survive without cocaine when you were 11? How was that possible? Can you imagine a future version of you living without cocaine? How do you think that future version of you will cope? So it's exploring around the problem, looking for exceptions today and in the past, and imaginary exceptions in the future. Another way of looking at it is the metaphor of glass half full, glass half empty. Somebody telling you all about the problem is describing why the water level is not at the top of the glass. And it's all true enough, but it's not the whole story. The other half of the story is why it's better than nothing at all. I would urge you not to do solution forced therapy. Somebody who really, really wants to talk about how empty their glass is addicted to their story, and they're not really ready for you to say, well, but what you're doing there is just focusing on the negative. What you've got to do is focus on the positive. That's not going to work because you're forcing it. So you're looking for subtle ways to sort of, like Columbo, go, so yeah, depressed all the time. But sometimes, like last Sunday, you told me it lifts under certain circumstances. That, you know, you're sort of working in those exceptions and working in questions about difference without saying your story is rubbish. You should ignore that story and try and focus on a new story. That doesn't work with humans. A neat way of doing it is scaling. I started today's presentation with a scale. 10 is perfect, 0 is the worst it could ever be. This is quite useful because a client will rarely tell you that they're at 0. And if they are telling you that they're at 0, they're stuck in their story, then they're not ready to work with you. Somebody who's ready to work with you will say, well, so on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is you are completely past depression and now living the life you just described to me of happy, optimistic, looking for work, sure in your own mind that you've got skills and abilities that no one's recognized yet, and one day somebody's going to pick it up. That's your 10 out of 10 state. 0 out of 10 is the worst it could possibly be. Alive, but not living. You're not able to get out of bed. You're not able to go to the toilet. You're not able to eat. You're completely paralyzed in a depressed state. So let me just ask, on average, how many marks out of 10 would you say you are? Well, let's say today. Well, about 3 out of 10 today. Okay, and if you don't mind me asking, what's going on today at 3 that's better than 0? Well, I'm not shitting myself, and I came out of bed to see you. How did you do that? How was that possible in this depressed state? Well, I've got to carry on, haven't I? Well, some people don't. You've chosen to carry on. You've chosen to push through. Is that right? So it's a very deeply unpleasant experience for you, but somehow, somewhere you've got the energy to try and sort yourself out. You've come here for some steps. Somewhere you've got that energy. Tell me, has it been 3 out of 10 solid for the last week, or has there been moments where it's been lower and higher? Oh, yesterday was a terrible day, it was 2. Okay. And any times when it's been higher than 3? Well, yeah, it was 5 out of 10 when I went round to my niece's house. What was different at 5 compared with 3? So using numbers is a really good way of not dismissing the truth of their negative story, but you're showing the interest in the positive story. Exceptions, coping questions, how are you coping? That sort of, how did you get here? Given that you're so depressed, how do you think it was possible for you to get here today? And tell me this. Okay, so I've covered 4 things. The importance of a story and the fact that there is not a single story that describes anybody's truth. There's stories competing in our heads for dominance. And genuinely positive outcomes can be got by building positive stories, as well as trying to dismantle negative stories. What's the expectation? I am not the solver of all their problems. I'm entitled to say, you've brought what do you want from me? You seem to be thinking I can help you, but what exactly were you hoping for? Well, I was hoping you could, have a word with the housing office to get me a house, whatever it is. What do they want? That's the critical one. I would really urge you to get used to and get practiced with that little algorithm of negative to positive, woolly to concrete, self to other, and lower to higher. It's so fruitful. Not only does it get descriptions of their preferred outcomes, the implication in the language is that they're going to get their own outcomes. You're not going to give them to them. The source of the outcome comes from them, not from you. So people have said to me in feedback on training talks, well, this seems to be about giving responsibility to patients. I mean, damn right it is, but it's an outcome that you get by using the approach, rather than the object is to get patients to take responsibility for their own behavior. That has to dawn on them. You can't tell them that. It has to dawn on them, and this language helps it to dawn on them. What's the time? 37. We've only got time for, so I won't labor it anymore. That I'll leave that image there for a few seconds, just while you start to formulate questions, and then I'll stop sharing. This is the parable, or I forget what it's called, of the wind and the sun competing to try and get a man to take his coat off. And the wind blows very hard, and the harder he blows, the more resistant the man is to take off his coat, whereas the sun simply shines. And it seems to me that, and it makes the man hot, and he takes the coat off himself because he's hot. this is sun style therapy, sun style conversation, as opposed to wind style conversation. In wind style conversation, you are trying to outdo the patient and blow their problems away by your force. It's draining. It's very hard. Much easier and happier to just be a bit of a sun-like character and gradually help the patient to choose their own choice of action. So with that, I never know how to unshare in Zoom. Stop video, choose background, no. So it may have to stay up while I click around, and I'll open up for questions from the floor.
Wonderful, Jonathan. That's really helpful, really interesting. I've really enjoyed watching that, listening to your talk. For the last 8 years, I've been, in myself, I've definitely been using lots of really sort of cool verbal tools, cognitive tools and ideas and concepts. And watching this talk makes me realize, I thought it was just my own creative genius, but I realize it's because I went to your talk 8 years ago and I remembered a lot of what you said and I've just been using it.
Of course it is.
Even yesterday, I was telling someone about going from 7 to 8, and I thought that's a really great idea of mine. And of course, it was yours. So thanks for the last 8 years. That's what I'm saying. So yeah, I really hope anybody watching has gained some of this. And these are really practical tools, which if I'm an example to go by, it has really helped. With a small group of us, so please turn on your microphones, turn on your videos if you want to, and ask any questions. And don't be shy, you don't need to put anything in the chat. I can see Dr. Mira said, fantastic practical advice, thank you. And it really is practical advice, stuff you can take away and start using with patients and family. That's quite good on family.
Practice well, it's actually quite a good technique to practice on your family, because one of the stages of people who sort of get involved with this way of thinking is, well, but you make it sound so easy, Jonathan. It's not actually that easy. What happens if you fall over halfway through? You can't remember what the next question was. I agree. A certain amount of fluency and confidence is really helpful. Fluency can come from practicing on your family, practicing on yourself, asking yourself questions in the mirror, just to get that sequence of questioning flowing, because it's a different way of thinking. Once it becomes habitual, it's effortless, I promise you. But it takes a while to get to the point of it being effortless. And yes, so you may not, so the second piece of advice that's allied to this is, you probably wouldn't test it on your hardest heart sync patient. You'd test it on some easier patients first to get a run in, because your hardest heart sync patients are the ones who are really quite skilled at keeping you exactly where they want you. So you need to have a better, sharper set of skills, or certainly a higher level of confidence to break that pattern between you. It's particularly hard if you've got stuck in a rut with a patient. To then change the dynamic between you is much harder than setting the dynamic with a new patient that you've never seen before, because you don't have to break your existing relationship in order to make a new style one. You can just get off on the right foot with a new style relationship. There was another chat came in, but I didn't see. Can you recommend any books? Not that have been written in the last 10 years. I stopped attending to the literature about 10 years ago. All the books are extremely repetitive because the method is really quite simple. The best thing I can say about the books is the actual transcripts of dialogue between patients and therapists, or patients and those they're consulting. Because you can put yourself in the shoes, you can imagine that scenario and you sort of see the sequence of questioning. I've always found real life transcripts incredibly helpful, or watching videos or audios of this technique being done. So I can't tell you if the brief therapy practice is still in business. You would do searches for brief therapy, solution focused therapy, not so much narrative anymore. And there may be new approaches that I'm unaware of. I know acceptance and commitment therapy came up came on the rails, which is not terribly dissimilar to this. Interestingly, the guy who runs that was a mucker of mine at Newcastle University. So, you know, these things all join out. Steve Peters as well, the monkey, what's it called? The hidden monkey paradox, chimp paradox. Steve Peters, that was him and me working together at Middlesbrough. These are ancient ideas that we've just repackaged. So there may be, and Evelyn Toe says, may have missed this, sounds very similar to motivational interviewing. Absolutely it is. Motivational interviewing is about the drivers to change rather than the change itself. Very useful in substance misuse. You know, what will it take for you to finally decide to do something about this? One of the aspects of motivational interviewing is, what are the benefits if you do it? This solution-focused sequence of questioning is a very powerful way of getting that description of, let's imagine your life. I would do the miracle question. Let's suppose you successfully gave up drugs. Might have taken you 1 year, 10 years, 10 minutes. Doesn't matter. You did it. It's in the past, and you are now totally settled in your new substance-free life. Describe it to me. There'd be a big pause because they haven't really thought about it. What do you suppose you'll do? So you wake up. What do you suppose you'll do? And then it's over to them. You can't fill in the blanks for them. They have to come up with a vision of themselves that they really, really want to be. Well, I think I might be living in a little English village, and I'll have joined the parochial church council and be a bell ringer. Something. We don't care what their vision is. It's their vision, but it's effortful to make a vision, and they have to do it. You can't do it for you. You can't suggest to them, why don't you move to a little village and become a member of the PCC? You don't know them. They're the experts in their own life. They know what's going to make them tick. We're just the engineers to ask the questions. Surya, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Dr. Prosser. Great presentation. I found it really useful to sort of come out of the cage of ice and you know, asking how can I help to start with. You know, I think it's a great way of putting it, sort of projecting all those questions positively. I think you know, thank you. I haven't seen those sort of set of questions before, so I'm definitely going to use them in my future consultations, and you know, I'm sure there'll be fruitful answers there. It's just in a way they empower the patient to, I assume, to you know, give a more optimistic answer rather.
Precisely. Yeah, no, well, that's been my experience. For some reason, you talking made me bring to mind one of the chief what about questions that you get, which is, but if I'm not doing a conventional approach, I might miss something. You know, if I've not asked the 17 symptoms of leukemia, I might miss leukemia. My experience, admittedly as a psychiatrist, not a hematologist, is that I didn't miss anything. I was able to detect when somebody was an active suicide risk. I was able to detect when somebody was psychotic. I was able to detect a dangerous anorexic picture, but all through the medium of what they wanted. So I got through my career without missing anything, despite not asking medical questions. They come out, there was just a natural way that either they came out into the conversation, you know, so an anorexic typically, well, I wouldn't be obsessed by food and I wouldn't be at risk of dying because of my body weight. And I then go, so what would you be? Well, I would want to be a normal weight and okay about it. That's a very different conversation as well. I think you may have anorexia. Are you fixated on food? Yes. Do you vomit? Yes. Okay. Do you do excessive exercise? Yes. Oh dear. Well, I'll refer you to CAMS then. You know, you've not done anything to get out of the problem, but you're still fully aware of the problem. So that's a reassurance, not an assurance that at least in my case, I didn't miss a glaringly treatable thing through the solution-focused approach, or at least I'm not aware if I did. Pissed a few people off because a lot of patients don't like to do work. They've got very used to having other people do work for them. But I say for your own mental health and for their benefit, don't do it.
Sam's got a question. Hi, could you do a practice session to put this into practice, please? Thank you. I think people really like this, Jonathan. I think they really feel there's some practical solutions here. Is that something you do?
I used to. As I said, I'm fully IT now, but I used to do 2-day training courses and 1-day training courses, half-day training courses. And one of the key things in each of those was, believe it or not, role play. If so before you start practicing on your families, you can start practicing on each other in a training session. Either in the format of pairs, giving feedback to each other about how things felt, or doing one out the front where the group assists you in coming up with a solution-focused line of questioning. And particularly over 2-day courses, you can see, I used to take a knowledge score. How much do you know about this? 0 to 10. How confident are you that it's applicable to your line of work? 0 to 10. And how fluent are you at it? And of course, each so knowledge would come up first, then confidence, it could be useful, and then a sense of personal fluency in the line of questioning. And obviously, the more training you have, the more fluent you become. What I will say is that you become fluent by doing it. It's just like couch to 5K, you become better by running, and you discover about running as you start to run. And then you start looking in running books, if you want to, about how to be an even better runner. So, relying on thinking that I can't do this unless I have some training. It'd be nice to have training, and I'd be prepared to be commissioned to do some training. But I'm waiting to be asked, I suppose. But it shouldn't stop you from practicing. Actually, you can do it in your own mind. You can do it with your children. It's just a different way of approaching a change-orientated conversation by focusing on what's not the problem here, but what do you want?
Thanks, Jonathan. That's really interesting, and I think your that thing about being commissioned to do some training. It's obviously clearly we're a small group here, but the response has been quite incredible. I think, if I'm speaking for others here, there's almost like this sense of dawning enlightenment that I get, and I think we're getting just listening to this. We actually, as an organisation, already work with 8 different ICSs, and actually going forward, we're now on a national NHS list to work with every ICS if that ICS so wants us. So what we could do, and you've provided us with a handout, guys, which will when Ellie's back on leave at the moment, who coordinates these meetings, but she's moving house today. But as soon as she's back, we'll get her to help disseminate that, that, Jonathan. But also, it's worth, if we can talk, if you guys can put us in touch with your ICSs, if you know people that we can get some funding to commission Jonathan to do some sort of stuff, because this is brilliant for a really powerful tool that we can take with us as locums and work using it in different practices, different patient groups. So that's quite an exciting thought, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And can I ask a question back? Because as I explained, I haven't done clinical work for nearly 4 years now. That was pretty slim because I was clinical director, so it was only about 2 days a week. Before that, CAMS was dominated by referrals for neurodevelopmental difference, and that's another talk. And consultants are too expensive to do solution-focused therapy. Okay, I can't be paid to sit and have 3 sessions with a patient at a consultant rate of pay. My question to you is the material I presented, does it betray a sense of being out of touch, or is it still fresh? It felt fresh to say it, and I still believe it, but I'm interested to people who are facing patients every day, and the game will have changed since I played it last. Is there anything, should we find younger, more actively clinically engaged trainers in the solution-focused approach, or is it safe to use old lags who used to do it in the past?
So yeah, the good. Saria, do you have you're there? Do you what do you think about to that, or Sam even on and people in response to Jonathan's question? Does this feel fresh?
I think it's fully in line and up to date. And as I said, I haven't seen those sort of questions elsewhere. I've read few books, especially for my RCA exam, and I literally read so many books, and I haven't seen this set of questions. I know the Royal College is fixated on eyes and making sure you cover eyes, but I think this is a better way of putting it. To be honest, it just, I think, empowers the patient and opens different avenues for you to engage with the patient. So
well, and critically, you're saying I didn't come across as out of touch, because I just really will step away if I feel out of touch. We've all met older people who are out of touch and don't know they are, and I live in fear of being that.
John, I every year I do 40 talks to GP vocational training schemes, 2,000 GPs a year, and I give a 45-minute talk on, large part of it is behavioural psychology, based on Daniel Kahneman's book Thinking.
Oh yeah,
yeah. It's the Bible, and I talk about this, and I always ask questions at the end. In your training, are you taught about confirmation bias and all this? People, no, they're not. It's still, as Saria says, it's about ice. It's about very old-fashioned. Sure, that the teaching has improved an awful lot since I did my training. I think it's really good, but it's not as far as I can work out what you've been talking about today. And I think what strikes me, and I think others here, is that what this is. Yeah, people are saying on the chat, very relevant. So crack on.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thank you so much for coming along. Really lovely to have such an engaged audience, and for your questions. And we are recording this, and John, I'll send you the link to make sure you're happy with it before we publish it. And guys, do watch the video again. I think I'm going to listen to it as a podcast. I think it's so good. Tell your friends about it, and we'll see what we can do as an organisation to get this sort of message more out there as a great consulting tool. So thanks very much, Jonathan. Thanks, Jacqueline, for organising this with Jonathan, and thanks everybody. And we'll see you at the next event next month, so first Thursday of the month, which Jacqueline, remind me, is ovarian cancer.
That is correct.
Ovarian cancer, it is. Yes, I'm done.
Hello.
My fellow GP.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Thanks very much,
Thank
everyone.
you very much.